Hey, good morning. Where we are is on of Hey Amud Aleph. We had done a little bit yesterday, about halfway down. I'm gonna Papa Pi Chazir. That's where I want to start today. Focus today will be on getting through a bunch of Hey Amud Bays. Hopefully tomorrow, I'm finishing the third parak. So it says the Gemara Papa Pi Chazir, halfway down on Hey Amud Aleph. Pi Chazir, the mouth of a pig. It's considered like tzayaveres. Pig is considered to be very dirty, like as we know, a pig does. I mentioned yesterday that a pig doesn't have sweatpants, therefore it always has to be rooting around in the mud. The more says pshita, well, I don't need to tell you that a pi chazir is like say a beres. Obviously, it's pasha. That's what a pig is. Says the Gemara. No, afagav the manar. Yesterday, I mentioned that there seems to be a distinction between the way the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch bring it down. The Rambam brings it down that a pi chazir is like say a beres, but doesn't mention the idea that even when it comes out of the river and it's all washed and nice, that it still be considered Tzara Beres. What Shulchan Aruch says it's the Tzara Beres, even if it's coming out of the river and it's all nice and clean. So I just wanted to add on one point from that, which I didn't mention yesterday, which is as follows. There is, and I mentioned this in a Shabbos Shuvah Joshua in the past, the notion of, we say, Mitzvah Satei Shazman Grama, there's also a notion of Isurim that are Zman Grama. Is every single Isser inherent, or is it also procedural? For example, somebody's to say that driving a car is absolutely usher? Of course not. Driving a car is absolutely no problem. Driving a car on Shabbos is, of course, a problem. So it's not inherently there's a mice with driving a car that's wrong. It's the time that's garam the problem with driving the car. So therefore, the question is, the Gemara tells us in Chulin Kuftes about a conversation between Yalta and Rav Nachman. Yalta said to Rav Nachman that we know that Kol Mad Asal and Rachbara Shalom Kavasei. So we have various examples of that. We say Anida, so the May Bisulim, we talk about Eshes Ish, so it's Grusha B'chaya Baila, all different situations where it's potentially mutter at some point in this world. And you want to know about Basa B'chalav. And the answer was, for Basa B'chalav, what was the answer? The answer was that we have Kral, right? The Kral, the udder, is where you have be able to taste Basa B'chalav in a kosher banner. So what I'm bringing up here now is the Medrash Tehillim. The Medrash Tehillim, we say in the pasuk every day in the Halalukas that Hashem is Mater Asurim. The Medrash tells us Hashem is Mater Isurim. What does the Mater Isurim means? That loss of love won't necessarily be that the Isurim will be as they are today. And Machlokes there in the Medrash exactly how far this goes. I'm not interested in getting into it now, but this were perhaps one of the fundamental sources for the idea that why is Lama Dekra Shema Chazir? Why is the pig called a chazir? Because la'asad lava, it's asad lachzar. What lachzar to what? To its kashrus. So the Archaim Parak Aleph, Pasach of Tes and Bereshis brings down a medrash. I'm not sure it's a medrash; it's more of an arizal. The idea that even the Eitz Hadas was not an inherent problem, rather a procedural one. That is to say, until the right time, until Shabbos came along, then it would have become mutter. So this would go well in the way that the Rambam wants to learn. Now, what do we mean when we say a pichazir is the tzaya veres? Pichazir is the tzaya veres only when he's dirty. But if he went to the nahar and got himself all cleaned up, so then he would not be considered dirty, and then it would be kosher. Then it would be no problem. Why would it be no problem? Again, if the pig is inherently a tzaya veres, even after it comes out of the river, then you have more of an issue with that. But it goes nicely with the way the Rambam wants to learn. Okay, continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Safek tzara asura, Safek meraglayim mutar. If we're going to have a Safek situation, the whole day is going to be about many of these kinds of like back and forth opinions on various different areas of fecal matter. So a lot of fun to bear in mind, and not necessarily easy to keep the cheshbon, but nevertheless we'll do our best. Rabbi Yehuda says, if we have a situation of a Safek, you're not sure, there's an uncertainty about the tzaya. Is there tzaya? Right? Or is there not tzaya? So Rabbi Yehuda says, a suffix if there's tzaya, then it's aser. Suffix meraglayim, if it's only a suffix, not if there's tzaya. You have a suffix if there's meraglayim, so then that would be mutter. Ikeda amid, there are those that say no. Rabbi Yehuda suffix tzaya b'bayis mutares. When is Rabbi Yehuda saying that it's suffix soya, that it's usr, doesn't mean just a random place. So we're saying as follows: if it's talking about in a house, is a suffix soya if there's in a house or not. Remember, in those days, they were making it they were doing their needs in an outhouse, so it's not very common to have tzaya in the house. As Rashi says, but bias mutter, the ain derech laniach tzaya, but it's not a very common thing to be having tzaya in a home. So if you have a suffix, if there's tzaya in the house, so that's mutter. But ba'ashba, which would be much more common in a garbage dump to have tzaya, so there a suffix tzaya is going to be considered usr. But suffix meraglayim, afilu ba'ashba, not mutar, but a suffix of meraglayim, even in an ashba is mutter. Says the Gemara, Savalok Yehuda Rav Hamnuna. Maybe we could say that this position of Rabbi Yehuda is like Rav Hamnuna. The Rav Hamnuna, what did Rav Hamnuna say? Loi asra Torah elo keneged amoid bilvad. What was the Torah answering when it came to Meraglayim? Only next to the amoid. Yesterday we talked about the amoid rishon as related to Soya. Today we're talking about the amoid as it relates to Meraglayim. Amoid is the stream. The stream can be either with regards to Soya or it could be a stream as it relates to Meraglayim. So what we're saying is that the real issue of Meraglayim is the sort of be'en stream, and when it's already gone, then it would be not going to be an issue. And Lumar is going to have further explain. Because Rabbi Yonason, Rabbi Yonason asked the stira, and the pasuk is telling us about the army, the Jewish army, going to fight a war. So it would have to make a place that it would be outside the machane where people can go to the bathroom. And it sounds like if they go to that place outside the machane, they can go to the bathroom. And there's no hint in the pasuk that says that when you're going to the bathroom, you have to be covering up the matter that's coming out. And nevertheless, it also the pasuk says, right? You have to take a spade with you when you go to fight in the battles. You have to cover. So it sounds so the beard sound like a bit of a stira. On the one hand, it sounds like as long as you have it at a house where you're going to the bathroom, no covering is needed over the fecal matter. On the other hand, it sounds like you have to have a spade in order to be able to cover it up. So what's going on? It sounds like a stira. So Rabbi said it wasn't a stira. Why not? Says the Gemara, how is this working? The nafkamina between Gedolim and Ketanim. That is to say, if someone's going to the bathroom for Gedolim, to expect that you have to cover it up. Someone's going to the bathroom for Ketanim, we don't have to cover it up. Right? The earth will take care of it pretty quickly. Says the Gemara, Alma Ketanim loy asra Torah el keneged amar b'van. So the Gemara wants to prove from this that you see that we're holding like the same shita. That what is the issue of Meraglayim? The issue is the sort of the be'en aspect of it. Keneged amoid, right? When it's there, when you see like the stream, that's when it's also to be, to be diving, to be saying Shema, etc. But once that stream is gone, so then it should be mutter ha nafula ara shari. But once it got to the ground, then it should be mutter. The Rabbanan who the Gazribahu and the rabbis went ahead and made further gezeris, and what did the rabbis make gezeris about? And when did the rabbis come along to make a gezerah bivadain? When you have a situation where it's 100% clear, then the rabbi said, okay, if there's for sure meraglayim here, so then we don't want you to be still saying Shema, etc. Aval b'sfeik and loy gazar. But if it's a suffix, meaning, what does it mean a suffix? It means that we're not sure if there was in fact meraglayim here or not. So then the rabbis didn't make a zagazera. Says the Gemara, "B'vadon ad kama." And okay, so now I know that there's meraglayim. I'm 100%, no doubt about it. We know that amoid, the stream of the meraglayim would be us, and I know now that the rabbis made a further gezeris on vada situations. We know there was meraglayim, but the Gemara wants to know ad kama. How far did the rabbis make a zagazera? How far does it actually go? The Amar Avidah Amar Shmuel called man shemat picha. It goes as far as if you would be touching the ground, that this meraglayim would still be matpiach, right? It would still be tefech, it would still be moistening. That's how that's where the gezerah goes until. But if it would be a situation where no longer be matbiach, if it would no longer be moistened, if it would touch the ground, then it wouldn't be awesome. So too we have a proof that Rabbi Bachana said the name Rabbi Yechanan, Kolzman Shemat Bichin, so long as it still moistens the meraglaim that was already in the ground, then it would still be us. The rabbi is still making exer against saying the Shema next to it. But once it stops being matbiach, once it stops being able to moisten anything, then it would no longer be the case. We're not talking about that. No, not for this. Our whole conversations on Reach Ra have mostly been in relation to passing wind, soy, and things of that sort. Meraglaim, I guess, it's possible that it has a smell. I'm not sure if that smell is as pervasive as soy. So it's a good question. And then we would consider it a Reach Ra. And maybe we would consider this as a regular Reach Ra. I'm not sure. So the Gemara continues. And the Gemara says, "V'chein Amar Ula, Kol Zman Shemat Bichin." So now we have a few people getting on the bandwagon, right? We have now Ula says, so long as it's matbiach, so long as it moistens, it would still be us to say the Shema. Geneva Mishmei de Rav Amar. Geneva says the name of Rav. Kol Zman Sherishumin Nicker. A different position. He says that it's usher. The rabbis are making a gezerah that it's usher to say the Shema, so long as the meraglayim has its signature clear. In other words, even if it's no longer moistening, but you can still tell, like, oh, somebody went to the bathroom there, then that would still be usher to recite the Shema, meaning it's a later period. The amount of evaporation, the amount of drying out is considerably longer. I thought I should just spend a minute on mentioning the idea that his name is Geneva, right? It's a bit of an odd name for somebody. And we have mentioned Geneva. We mentioned Geneva. We mentioned Geneva on a Shavuos night when we discussed Masira, which was this year. We did Masira this year. Yeah, so it was this past Shavuos, so 6 to 8 months ago, or whatever it was now. And we mentioned the Gemara tells us in Gittin on Chesam and Aleph, I think. The Gemara tells us that Geneva got into a fight with Mar Ukva, and they eventually took him out in chains, and he was killed. He was killed, Geneva. And the question was over there. The Gemara says that Mar Ukva asked they're both Mar Ukva is in Bavel. He's the Reish Galusa, and Geneva was presumably then in Bavel. And so that's where they got into a fight. And Mar Ukva wrote a letter to Rabbi Lezer, who was in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Lezer was the Mar the Asher of Eretz Yisrael. They wrote him a letter asking what he's able to do to Geneva, and he said, "Don't worry about it. Like, just don't do anything." But it sounds like he davened and eventually he got into trouble. The Gemara does mention, and the Yerushalmi tells us that Geneva, that Rav said about Geneva that who's Zakin Vani Zakin. That even though he's a student of Rav, that Rav held of him and said he's like a Zakin, he's like a serious person. We're also going to have Geneva in 2 pages on Chav Zayin. Geneva is going to tell us about Rav's davening on Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos, right, which we use as the source. So it's not always Geneva that we have a problem with. There's another Gemara in Gittin, I think on Laman Alpha and Beis. The Gemara tells us there that Geneva was coming by. There was a few of my room sitting around there. So should we get up for this guy? On the one hand, he's a Bar Orion. He's a Talmud Chacham. Right? We had Bar Orion before. If you remember, the Gemara told us the Gemara told us that we call it Ben Terah. It's called the son of Rab, a Bar Orion, right? And so on the other Amar there says no. He's a palga. He's a person who makes machlokes. So should we get up for him? One other Gemara there in Gittin, I think on Samach or Samach Beis. Yeah, the Gemara says over there that Geneva was being taken out to the whatever, the hangman or however they killed him in those days by the government. The government was killing him, and on his way out, he said that his assets, he divided up his assets. Who should get his assets? That was on his way out. So Geneva was clearly a complicated person. Sometimes we say Kishmai Kain Hu, right? The pasuk tells us in Shmuel, right? By when David HaMelech was going and taking care of Novel's sheep. So the way it worked was that you take care of the sheep, you get paid. I'm not sure if it was a protection racket like the mob or this kind of a thing, There was no agreement with Novel in advance, but since he protected Novel and made sure all the shepherds and the sheep were all good, he expected to get paid. The pasuk says, and Novel laughed at his men or whatever when they said they're going to ask for payment. He's like, "You, essentially usurper, right? Your father was the king, and he's the only one I deal with. I'm not dealing with you." So David was going to go destroy him and wipe out his whole everything. And Novel's wife, right, Abigail, she protects him. And she says about her husband that Kishmai Kain Hu, right? That's where we get the expression from the pasuk. That so is what he is. He's that's his name. Remember that word novel is also used in Parashas Yisro when comes the next morning after he comes to he just visit his son-in-law. The next morning he's already giving his son-in-law advice. It's an unbelievable thing, right? He says novel tibo gamato gamamazeh. Right? It's disgusting. You're making all the people wait there all day to ask you a question. It's not a great thing. So maybe we get to that day he was called Geneva. Yeah, I'm not sure 100%. No, it was his name. I don't have more to say about it, other than the fact that it's kind of an ironic name for somebody who ends up getting killed in such a manner. Says the Gemara. So Geneva had an opinion that Rav is of Rav that is more machmir than the other opinions. We have been talking now that the urine is usher to be saying the Shema next to it. Of course, when it's an amoy, a stream, of course, but even when it landed in the ground, we said that it would still be usher calls masham at pichin so long as it still moistens. And Raganev is saying the name of Rav that calls masham rishuma nikir so long as its signature is still clear, that would still remain usher. I'm Rabbi Yosef. Sharla mare legeneva. Hashem should forgive Geneva, as Rashi says. And now that we have all the context, Rashi says that Rabbi Yosef is saying that Geneva was surely lying. Yimchale Rebbeinu, Rashi says, Devade Sheker Heid Mishmei de Rav. Of course, he's lying about Rav said. Again, is it so normal to say that about somebody? Yes, we do find this concept of Shari Mare many times in Shas. Can't go through that now, but maybe we have an added context over here. So Rabbi Yosef said, no, it can't be that. That's what Rav said. Hashtat Tzoy Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Kevan Shekaron Panam Mutter Meraglaim Ibaya. So what's Rabbi Yosef's problem with what Geneva said? He says that we have another edus from Rav that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Rabbi Yehuda was a student of Rav and Shmuel, and sometimes we have him quoting Rav and sometimes quoting Shmuel. That he said when it came to Tzoya, when it came to number two, the halacha is Kevan Shekarmu Paneh. Once it becomes dried, the halacha is it's mutter. So you have a question about Meraglayim. Obviously, Meraglayim will be mutter. So Amalei Abai, my chaz is the samches aha samach aha. Why are you asking this on Geneva and saying, "Wow, Charlotte Murray, he's obviously that's a lie." Maybe there's another understanding of where Rav's position was as follows: the Amar Rabba Barav Huna Amarav, and we have another lesson from Rabba Barav Huna, stand in the name of Rav Tsoya Afilu Kecheres Asura. That a tsoya is also even if it was not so dry that it became like a cheres, like it became like a pottery, that became there's absolutely no lachluchias, there's no wetness in this tzaya anymore. It's so dried out that's mamish like nothing. And nevertheless, Rav still said that it's awesome. Says the Marechi David Tzara Kecheres. What is exactly you talking about? What is the practical way of understanding very dried out saya? That it would be considered like a cheres, like mamish, like a earthenware, like a pottery. So Amar Rabbi Bar Chana Rabbi Yechanan. So Rabbi Bar Chana, even though we had just brought him down in relation to the urine, now we're bringing him down in relation to the tzaya. So he said as follows: what does it mean when it's so dry? Kozman shezarka ve'ena nifrachas. If you would be able to throw the tzaya and it wouldn't crumble at all, right? Because it's become a solid piece of dried out material. So that is one way of understanding it. Another way of understanding is shegoyla ve'ena nifrachas. It's not throwing it, but it's rolling it, and it's also not crumbling. Amar Ravina. Have Amina kamei Rav Yehuda midifti. Ravina says that I was standing by Rav Yehuda midifti. And what happened? Chazat tzoya. So we saw that there was tzoya there. So Amarli, so Yehuda midifti said to me, Ayin e karmu paneh Eloi. Please check it out and see like how dried out it's become. The Igad Amri, Hachi Amarle. Another version is what he said to him is what? Ayin imapulei mapuluye. Instead of saying, see if it became karmu paneh, if it became so dry, see if it has cracks in it. I guess the cracks would be an indication of its dryness. I'm not such an expert in these matters, Baruch Hashem, but sounds like, again, a variety of opinions on how something must become desiccated and dry, desiccated, I forget how to pronounce that, in order for it to become mutter. So the Gemara wants to know, after all of this is said and done, all the opinions, my have Allah. So what exactly is the rule as when it comes to meraglaim? We've mentioned now a variety of opinions. It's confusing. So what is the halacha? The Gemara says as follows: Itmar tzoya kecheres. If I have soya that is mamish like pottery, it's like earthenware, it's so dry. So then the halacha is amemar amar asura umar zutra amar mutaris. Machlekes between amemar amar zutra about whether or not soya kecheres, if you have soya that is so dry like it's like pottery, is that still asur or not? So again, as we pointed out already, different opinions as to what Rav in fact had held. Amar Rava, Hilchasa Tsoya Kecheres Asura. The halacha is as it relates to Tsoya, if it's so dry like a cheres, the halacha is Asur, as in fact we had just quoted before, that that was potentially one of the opinions of that we said in the name of Rav. But Umeraglayim, as when it comes to Meraglayim, Kol Zman Shemat Pichin, so long as it is moistening. So long as it's still able to be moistening, it will remain usher. But once that is no longer, then it would become mutter. So says the Gemara as follows: Meisvei, I want to understand better. We have a price that says Meraglaim calls man shemat pichan asurin. We have a price that says that when you have meraglaim, so long as it moistens, it's usher. Nivlu, if it's swallowed up by the ground, right? What exactly does nivlu mean? Not 100%, but it's swallowed up by the ground to some degree, a yavshu or becomes dry, then mutar, then it's not a problem anymore to recite the Kriya Shema. Says the Mar, my love, nivlu daimid the yavshu. What does probably means is that the nivlu is similar to yavesh, right? Being swallowed by the ground is similar to drying out. So my yavshu in the ein rishum nicker. Just like what? When you have something that becomes yavish, when it becomes dried out, it's not going to have its signature there anymore. So afnivlu de emishumanikar, then presumably what it means is that when something becomes yavish, it doesn't have its signature there anymore. And so therefore the halacha must be harishuman nikar aser, that if its signature is there, in other words, if you still could tell that there was a meraglayim over there, then it would still sound like what? It's usher. But what then is the key factor? The key factor is Rishuma Nicker. If the key factor is Rishuma Nicker, then that's a much later period than Matbichin, says the Gemara. But I don't understand. So Harishuma Nicker is usher. Afagav the Ein Matbichin. Even though it's no longer moistening. And you just said that according to the way Rava wanted to learn, Rava had said, it's only going to be usher so long as it moistens. And what we're saying now is sounds like the Shita of Geneva, right? That so long as the Shuman Nicker is when it's usher. So a later period of time. So says the Gemara, one second, you want to ask me a question based upon this brisa. The brisa didn't mention, right? The brisa didn't mention the words of Shuman Nicker. The brisa just said, Kozman Shemat was usher, but Nivlo Yavshu was mutter. And the question was, what exactly is Nivlu Yavshu? We ended up pointing out that Nivlu Yavshu presumably means it's a situation where Ein Rishuman Nicker. And that's what we're saying is mutter. So if that's what we're saying is mutter, that would seem to indicate that if a Shuman was Nicker, then it would be Usr. If a Shuman Nicker is Usr, then that's a steer to what Rava just said, because Rava just said that Allah is called to Mashamat Bichin. That's when it's Usr. But a Shuman Nicker will be mutter according to the way Rava had learned. So the Gemara says, okay, you want to try to prove from this brisa that this brisa is telling me that Rishum and Nikar is Aser, which is the later period than Matbichin. Well, Taimech, but I'll ask you a question. What's the question I'm going to ask you? A Maresha, what did the opening of this brisa say? The opening of this brisa said, Kol's man shematbichin hu da Aser. The opening of this brisa said that Kol's man that it's matbiach, Kol's man that it's still what moistening? That's when it's usher. What can you learn out from the ratio of the brisa? Rishuma nikar shari. So then for the clear indication of the beginning of the brisa. It means that only when it's matpiach it's also. But if a shuman nicker, a later period of time when you can still see the signature of the merag lime, then it will be mutter. So you have a steer in the brisa. Then you're indicating from the ratio of the brisa that rishuma nicker is mutter, and you're indicating from the save of the brisa that rishuma nicker is aser. So says the more no. We can't learn anything out of this brisa. You can clearly indicate from the ratio one way and from the seifa a different way. So it says the Gemara, let's say that these opinions are also machlekes these tanoim. That what? Klisha nishbechum mimenu meraglayim. If you have a keli that has meraglayim in it, and it can spill out from it. So in that situation, also the kriya shema kenegdai. Then it'll be also to recite the shema next to such a keli, where meraglayim can be coming out of it. But if you have the meraglayim that has already been spilled out, it's already gone into the ground. So nivlu mutter loy nivlu also. This line of this brisa is telling us that if it was nivlu, then it's mutter. But if it's not yet nivlu, then it's aser. Rabbi Yossi says, no, it's only aser calls man shemat pichen. So what does it sound like? What's the machlekes here between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi? Says the my nivlu. What does it mean that it was swallowed up? My loy nivlu to Amar Tanna Kama. What is the Tanna Kama? So the clear machlekes here between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi. What is this machlekes about? The machlekes is about nivlu and matpichen. What does it mean? That kozman that it's nivlu, then it's going to be mutter. But loy nivlu, if it's not yet nivlu, then it's going to be aser. What does exactly nivlu mean that the Tanna Kama is saying? Says the Gemara, "Ilema nivlu de'emat pichin and loy nivlu de'mat pichin." If you're going to say that what nivlu means that it's no longer moistening, and loy nivlu means that it's still moistening, so that doesn't work. V'asher Rabbi Yossi l'meimar, because then Rabbi Yossi is coming along to say, "Kol zman shemat pichin," it's aser. Now Rabbi Yossi is saying that whenever it's matpiach, when it's still moistening, then it's aser. V'asher Rabbi Yossi l'meimar calls it man shemat pichin hu da'aser rishum and nicker shari. But when it's Rishum and Nicker, then it will be mutter according to him. It's only us when it's close Mashem Matbichen. Says the Marhainu Tanakama. Right? That's exactly the Tanakama. If Nivlu means that it's no longer Matbichen, and Loy Nivlu means that it's still Matbichen, and Rabbi Yossi, that's what will be Aser. And then Rabbi Yossi is coming along saying, Kos Mashem Matbichen is Aser. That's Mamash Tanakama. There's no machlekes there between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. Elamai, what must it mean? Ella, says the Gemara, Nivlu means the Ein Rishuman Nicker. What does Nivlu mean? Nivlu means that the Rishuman is not Nicker. It's not Nicker anymore. So it means the machlekes between Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi is on what Nivlu had meant. Right? We had thought Nivlu meant Matpichin. That's no longer a possibility because then it will be Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi are the same exact position. So what is Nivlu, La Nivlu going on? It's going on Rishuman Nicker. So according to the Tanakama, when we say nivlu, when we say that the meraglayim is nivlu, that must mean that it's what do you call it? It's a situation when it's the signature of it has been totally eradicated. There's no obvious way to say that there was any meraglayim there. That would be mutter. But if it was rishuman, would still be obvious, it would still be Rishuma Nicker, then it would be Aser. And Rabbi Yossi is coming along being Meiko and saying it's only Aser if it's Matpichin. So says the Gemara, Ella Nivlu, the Ein Rishuma Nicker. What does it mean, Nivlu? The Rishuma is not Nicker anymore. Loy Nivlu is the Rishuma Nicker. So according to the Tanakama, if Rishuma is Nicker, then it's going to be Aser. If Rishuma is not Nicker, then it's Mutter. So it's a more machmir take position than Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi come along to make it lememer calls mashim matpichnu to aser only when it's matpichnu it's still aser. But Rishuma Nicker shari. So then it's going to come out that Rishuma Nicker will be mutter. Then we would have a far machlekes between Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama. Says the Mar, no, I don't want to say that. Rather, I'll say like this: Loy says the Mar, the kulei amma calls mashim matpichnu to aser. Both the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi agree that calls mashim matpichnu is aser. Harishuman nicker shari, but when Rishuman is nicker, would be mutter, meaning everybody is agreeing with not Geneva's approach to Rav, but rather the more mekotika position, which is that the meraglayim, of course, the amud of the meraglayim, the stream of it is aser when it goes into the ground, and Rishuman is no longer nicker, Everyone agrees that that's mutter. Even if it's Rishuma Nicker would be mutter. So where then is the machlokes? Machlokes is only in an earlier time, which is as follows. So everyone says as follows: Lord, the everyone agrees that when it's still matpichin, when it's still going to moisten, it's going to be aser. Harashuma nicker, but Rashuma is nicker, then everybody's going to agree that it's mutter. So where then is in machlokes? Right? We thought the whole time the machlokes was matpichin and Rashuma nicker. Now we have a new stage. And what's the new stage? We turn to the page now of Ham base. Now the difference is a situation where it's tefech amanas la'atpiach, meaning, and what does it mean that it's matpichin? We're saying it's enough to still moisten something else. That's the question that we are discussing. That the Tanakama is holding. That it has to be tefech amanas la'atpiach. It has to be moist enough that it can still moisten something else. And then the Rabbi Yosi says no. Calls much matpichin. As long as it's moist, it's not moist enough to moisten something else. But it's nevertheless still going to be it. So what comes out now, that again, the Amud of Meraglaya, and everybody agrees is Aser. Once the Meraglayim went into the ground. So then we have Matpichin. Everybody agrees that if the Meraglayim went into the ground and the ground is moist, what's the halacha? Is Aser. When now everyone agrees that when it's no longer moist enough, but Rishuman is Nicker, is going to be what? Everyone agrees is mutter, right? If the Rishuma is not nicker, of course everybody agrees is mutter. But now we have a new position there in between. After matpichin, right? It's no longer moist enough to moisten something else, right? But it's still moist. There now we have a machlokes. If there are some who say that if something is still moist enough that it's able to moisten something else, then of course it's aser. But if it's not able to moisten something else, that's when it becomes mutter. So you don't need a situation of Rishuma Nicker to make it mutter. You have this additional stage in between that if it's not Tefech Amanas Latbiach, there are those, like the Tanakama, like the Rabbi Yosi, who say that only Matpichin is Aser, but if it's not able to be Tefech Amanas Latbiach, it cannot moisten something else, even though it is still moist, it would become already mutter. Fine. That takes us now to Rav Hema base. Says the Gemara, Yorad Litboil. So somebody wants to go down to, remember the Mishnah told us, somebody's going into the mikvah, and he has to recite the Kriya Shema. So the Gemara says as follows, Yorad Litboil, he went down to be toivel, im yachal alas, if he has enough time to come back up and get dressed and recite the Shema, then that's what he should do. But if he doesn't have sufficient amount of time to be able to come and recite the Shema, then what should he do? So he should stay in the mikvah, cover himself up, and recite the Shema. Says the Gemara, Lema Tana stomach Rabbi Lezer. Let's say that our Mishnah is going with the position of Rabbi Lezer. If you remember the Gemara there on the Mishnah on Tesla Beis, we had a machlokes from Rabbi Lezer Rishua. It sounded like what Rabbi Lezer said is that you have until Nates in order to recite the Shema. And according to Rabbi Rishua, you had until Shalosh Sois. So the Gemara is saying it must be that we're holding in the Mishnah like Rabbi Lezer. Why? Because you are being able to recite the Shema in the mikvah. Because clearly it's a huge urgency. You have to recite the Shema before it's Nates, and then you lose this man. Must be going to Rabbi Lezer. Leimatana stomach Rabbi Lezer, right? The Netzachama. I feel time Rabbi Shua says more. No, can go even with Rabbi Shua. But then maybe we're going with Rabbi Shua in the Mishnah, and it's like the Vasikin. I'm Rabbi Yechon, Vasikin, Regam, Reisim, and Netzachama. What the Vasikin do? They will recite the Shema with the Nates. So they want to be like the Vasikin. So they were reciting it at that time, and therefore this Mishnah is not approved like it's going with Rabbi Lezer. It could also be going with Rabbi Shua. I never understand this Gemara. Why don't I understand this Gemara? Because what is the Vasikin? What do they do after Nates? Right? They recited the Shema before Nates. What do they do next? Immediately afterwards, they recited the Shema Esrei. We're not talking about a guy who recited the Shema Esrei. We're only talking about him saying the Shema in the mikvah. So what do you mean he's going to be sure that he's going to be like the Vasikin? He's not. He's not doing the Shema Esrei at the right time. You're not a Vasikin if you say the Shema with the Nates and you don't say Shema Esrei afterwards. You're only Vasikin if you have Shema coming and then immediately after the Nates coming with the Shema Esrei. So I have a question on this Gemara. I don't know. Okay, this is the Gemara. The next line is V'im Lav. You don't have enough time, so you skasa b'mayim v'yikra. The Mishnah told us if you don't have enough time to come out of the mikvah, you should cover yourself with water and then recite the Shema. So what does it mean? You cover yourself with water. Again, we had the very Gemara of Dalit that your heart is seeing the erva. So it's not going to be us. V'itema Rav Acha bar Abba bar Acha Mishum Rabbeinu. Oh, this is our second Mishum Rabbeinu, right? Remember we had Mishum Rabbeinu. We just had Mishum Rabbeinu. Where we had it, Mishum Rabbeinu. Remember our Nechav Daled, not Nechav Daled. We had it on Chav Beis. Chav Beis Amanal, we have Mishum Rabbeinu. Over there, Rashi said Mishum Rabbeinu was Rav. Remember, we went on a whole disquisition. Not going to go into that now. But over here, does Rashi say Mishum Rabbeinu was being Rav? He does not. Why? Because you've already learned about it on Chav Beis. Obviously, you didn't forget. The question is going to be, as I said, this is a little conversation throughout Maseches Brachos. Why Rashi, or in other Maseches, whenever this comes up, where Rashi explains, it doesn't explain. We have to keep it in mind. So it says the Gemara, Rav Acha bar Abba said the name of Rabbeinu. He said the name of Rav. B'mayim achurin shanu. We're talking about a situation of murky waters, not disgusting waters, not waters that are dirty, but mayim achurin, murky waters. The damu ka'ara smichta. It's like the ground is like covering you. Shlo yira libay ervasad. That your heart should not be able to see your erva. So in other words, from this Gemara, it sounds like you're covering yourself in water. How's that going to work? Isn't Liba Resa Erva? What does that sound like? It sounds like Liba Resa Erva is Aser. The Gemara is answering, no, Liba is not Resa Erva. Why is it not Resa Erva? Because you got to have murky waters. That we're talking about, the murky waters will cover you and therefore will not be Aser. Happens to be, Taisus points out from here, top Taisus, that it would sound like from here the Liba Resa Erva is in fact Aser, but a student of Rashi, Rabbeinu Shmaya, if you look in the Taisus Rabbeinu Peretz, or I think it says Rabbeinu Peretz, he brings down Rabbeinu Shimshon, whoever it was, some sort of a student of Rashi said, no, Libas Resa Erva is actually mutter, as we saw it is machlokes. So it's not 100% clear. In any event, what we see from here is that if a person is in a mikvah and they have to recite the Shema, they could cover themselves in water, murky water. And the Gemara now explains, Rabbeinu Chananah brings down what we're about to say into this Gemara over here. So what exactly is the situation? Tanar Abana, Maim Tzlulin, one of the somebody's in clear water, and he has to recite the Shema. So Yosef ben Atzavar, he should stand it into his neck and he should recite the Shema. V'yesh Oimrin Eichram Beragloi. And others say he should be making it murky with his feet. In other words, what happens if you, in clear water, if you shuckle the water with your feet, you make a bit of a foam, right? Then all of a sudden it's going to become murky water, and then you will not be able to see. And therefore that would be mutter. So the Gemara says, and there are those that want to say the Mayim Achun, the Gemara that we just had, but that's what he means as well. The Rabbeinu Chananah says that effectively you can always make the water achurin by simply moving it around a little bit. That would make it no longer be visible. Says the Gemara, v'tanakama v'harei libay re'es erva. According to the Gemara, we just said that if somebody's going to be reciting the Shema in a mikvah, so the Yesh Omer says you have to be Eichem Baragli, you have to move it around in order to make it murky, to be able to block you, to be able to recite the Shema. But what about the Tanakama? The Tanakama sounds like you just stay in the water till your neck and recite the Shema. But don't you have a problem of Liba Resa Erva? Says the Gemara, no. Kisava Liba Resa Erva mutter. You also have Liba Resa Erva is mutter. Says the Gemara, Akeva Resa Erva. The Ritva points out, doesn't mean Akeva specifically your heel seeing the Erva, although there are some who want to point out that the Akeva could, sometimes you could be bending your feet, and the Akeva could be mamish in the Makam Erva. But the Ritva says, no, it's really any other body part. The only body part that says is not included in this is the Einayim. The Einayim, he says, that he asks, the Ritva asks, why don't we mention the Einayim? So he says, because the whole body being in the water is like a chatzitza between the eyes and the rest of the body, even by Mayim Tzlulin. But the lave, right, the cave, all that is mamish in the water with the erva. So that's why we're asking this as a question. Fine. So that's the point of the ritva. So the Gemara asked, what about the rest of the body? Right, we're here specifically mentioning the heel, but I mean the rest of the body is saying that's seeing the erva. The sarva keva erva mutter. You also know a keva erva is not a problem. Says the Gemara, Itmar Akeva Erva Mutter Naigea is where you have a machlekes, right? We have one opinion. We're gonna have two versions of this. One opinion is Akeva Erva is mutter, but Naigea, if the Akeva is touching the erva, then Abai Amar Aser Rav Amar mutter. Then we have a place Abai Rav if it's Aser or mutter. But Rav Zvid Masin Lo Lahoshmaitz Hachel. Rav Zvid is the one who understood it this way. However, we have a different version. Rav Chinena Berei de Rav Ika Masin Lo Hachi. He has a different version of it. His understanding is like this: not the situation of a kever to ever mutter and the machlokes is by negea by rava. He says no. What's his version? He says negea divrei hakel aser. He says by negea everyone holds it's aser, right? The last version is the by rava machlokes if it's negea. He holds the by negea everyone holds it's aser. Roya, but by roya abai amar aser. Virava amar mutter. But there you have machlokes by rava if it's just roya. That's when you have machlokes. Everybody gives by negea it's for sure aser. What's the reason that a Rava would say by Roya, right? Like Roya se erva that it's not a problem? This is when the Torah it's because the Torah is not given to angels. Like, you have to be normal. These kinds of things happen, and you can't be like angels don't have, as Rashi says, angels don't have an erva. So that's why you can't compare us to angels, right? This becomes in Shabbos Peches the heter for us to get the Torah, right? Because like in the Torah Malach Shores is fundamentally as the Moshe Rabbeinu tells the ministering angels. Does it say, do you have kabbalah savicha simecha? Do you have parents? Right? It says, that you shouldn't kill. You shouldn't loisachma. Do you have any of these feelings? Nothing. It's not related to you. Loik didn't the Torah Malach becomes our raison d'etre, our defense for after 120. You tell the Rebbeinu, like the Torah Malach I did the best I could. Yes. Whether that works or not to be seen. All right, continues the Gemara. The halacha is halacha l'maisa that if it's a situation where you have a nagia, a keva is mamish touching the erva, then it's asa, but roya is going to be mutter. Amar Rava says the Gemara. Amar Rava. Rava says as follows. What do we say? Tsoya ba'ashoshis mutter likros kriyash makenegda. Rava says that if you have a tsoya in some sort of a the lashon of Rashi is lantern, right? If you have it in some sort of case, right, but it's a visible, it's a see-through case. So if you have tsoya in the case, then it's mutter, right? You see the tsoya, but it's locked up. It's in a sample that you gave a tsoya sample to the doctor, right? Could you say to Shema? It's in a case. It's in a case. So we're not talking about a situation. You're closing your eyes. It's a good point. We're not talking about that right now. So hold on. So Rava says that if it's a tsoya ba'ashoshes, then it's mutter to be carried kriyat shema, even though it's totally visible, right? It's not a question about closing your eyes for here, right? If you close your eyes, it's still visible. Just because you close your eyes doesn't mean it's not there. So the Gemara says that tsoya ba'ashoshes is mutter to recite the kriyat shema. But erva ba'ashoshes is also the kriyat shema. But erva ba'ashoshes, then it's also to recite the kriyat shema next to it. So says the Gemara. Tsoya ba'ashoshes mutter the kriyat shema kenegda. Why? The tsoya bekisu Italian milsa. Because the issue with tsoya is kisui, is being covered. The mirsa, and here it's covered. The fact that you could see it is irrelevant. It's covered, so therefore it's okay. But everybody shosh also the kriyat shema negda. But everybody shosh is also to be carried kriyat shema next to it. Why? Because the pasuk says v'layir b'chayir bas davar marachmana. Because it says you shouldn't have any eres davar to be seen. Over here, here you can see it. Here you're able to see the erva. So just to try to finish it, the two dots, we'll say like this. Amar Abaya. So Abaya says tzoya koshu mivat leberoik. If somebody has just a tiny bit of tzoya on the ground, right, you can spit on it and you can mivatel it. Amar Rava uberoik ava. Rava says, okay, we're talking about a lot of spit, like a gazunta, amount of spittle. So Amar Rava tzoya beguma. When you have tzoya in a little bit of a hole in the ground, so miniach sandali oleo v'kari kriyat shema. Cover it with your sandal, and then you'll be able to recite the kriyat shema. So boy my bread Ravina, he asked the question, tzoya devuka b'sandali mai. What is the situation if you have a tzoya which is attached to the bottom of your shoe? So the halacha was taken. Wasn't sure about this. Amar Rav Yehuda akum arum also the kriyat shema kenegda. If you have an akum that's arum, then it's also to recite the kriyat shema next to him. Says the my Arya Akum, I feel Yisrael Nami. Why are you talking about an Akum that's also recited to Shema next to him? If Yisrael should be Aser also. So no. Yisrael is what? Pshita like that, the Aser. Of course by Yisrael it's Aser. But by Akum, I had to have me that maybe be mutter. What's having me by Akum with mutter? As follows. El Akum it's Shrich Lemau, the Tema Helvik Sibu Asher B'Sarach Hamar and B'Saram. I might have thought that the pasuk says that the b'sar chamar are b'sarim, emaka chamar ba'alma. I might have thought that they're like a chamar ba'alma, and therefore that they don't have a situation where they can be considered an erva. Kamash Malon, the inu nami ikru erva, that they're also considered an erva. Where's the proof of that? The siv ervas avihem loy ra'u, that the erva of their father they did not see. I'll just point out a couple of unbelievable things, but we don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, to explore. Number one, this gemara b'sar chamar and b'sarim. What comes up in Yavamas, we have discussed this in the past in relation to our Shiur on Goyim. You have to look at the Gemaras in Yavamas Saliches, Yavamas Samach Aleph. The Gemara there discusses about the fact that goyim don't have yichus. We learned that out from this pasuk of B'sar Chamer and B'saram that goyim do not have yichus. So even though they don't have yichus, they nevertheless still have. Even though they don't have yichus, they still have what? They still have erva. That's number one. Number two, we learn out from this Gemara about the Gemara said erva ba'ashoshis, that if you're looking at the erva in a looking glass, right, in some sort of a see-through cover, that would still be considered usher. So my Rebbe asked as a question, what happens if you see Erev on television? Is that something that you can nevertheless still be reciting the Shema or not about? So he has a whole chuvas here back and forth on this question. Of course, the answer is that you can't, but the point is as to why not. And he says, cover your eyes and then you'll be fine. But if you can't close the TV, you're on a plane, you're in the restaurant, whatever, you can't close the TVs, close your eyes. So, but he has very interesting rise back and forth as to what is the halacha here. Unfortunately, with our time, I can't explain more. I'll just mention that in relation to it comes up this might Shabbos, you have to do Kiddush Levana, right? And if you're going to do Kiddush Levana, when you're outside looking at through a telescope, looking at it through glasses, looking at it through some other thing, do we consider any looking through something that is see-through material, some that is not looking, right? Is this an erev b'ashoshis kind of a situation or not? Allah, everybody, and so the Shuf from the Shus Yaakov, Prague, Oberland is of course where he says based upon our Gemara over here on Chav Hey that you can look through the telescope, look through the glasses, no problem to be able to recite the Kiddush Levana. It's not an issue at all. It's totally considered looking. The last thing to just mention, we said about the erva being by the goyim, by an erva that's considered an erva. This comes up as a practical matter when a guy wants to convert to Judaism, right? Before he converts, right? Does he consider it erva? Yes, absolutely. So if a male is going to be making the bracha, has to cover the erva. What about by a baby? Right? On this we have a machlekes. The Shulchan Aruch paskins that a male doesn't have to cover the baby. Sometimes you might see that a male does, because there are those opinions that say that even a baby is considered to have an erva. Unfortunately, no more time.